For almost all of human history, we were haunted by one problem. There was rarely enough, not enough grain, not enough cloth. People usually wanted more than farms and workshops could reliably make. And then, in the industrial age, something new happened. For the first time, factories could produce surpluses faster than people could afford to buy them. And it turned out that too much could be more dangerous than too little. Because a warehouse full of goods nobody can buy, that is not wealth. That is a problem. Today, I'll tell you the story of why you buy things you don't actually need. It starts with a soap company and the man it hired to engineer desire. To understand what broke, picture the world before. For thousands of years, everything was made by hand. A blacksmith made a handful of tools in a day. A weaver produced a few yards of cloth, and scarce things sell themselves. The baker never needed to advertise his bread because someone hungry was always waiting for it. In that world, the binding limit was almost always production. Making enough was the whole challenge. Then came steam, steel, and the assembly line. And factories learned to produce faster than markets could absorb. Machines don't get tired. Production climbed past a line no one had reached before, the line of what people could actually pay for. By the 1920s, the machines had won. Factories in America were producing more than the market could absorb. Supply had exploded, but wages and purchasing power had not kept pace. The shelves were full, the warehouses were full, and the wallets were not growing fast enough to empty them. This was the surface problem. Too many goods, not enough buyers. But underneath it was something deeper. A need can be filled. How many bars of soap does one person need? How many coats? Be honest. When did you last wear the third one? Need has a ceiling, and a system built to grow forever had just slammed into that ceiling. So the question changed. For all of history, it had been, how do we make more? Now it became, how do we make people want more? Advertising already existed. For centuries, it had announced that a product was for sale, but its job was about to be reinvented. It would stop telling people what a product did and start telling them who they could become. And here's where the story gets strange. The man who understood this earlier and more clearly than almost anyone was named Edward Bernays. He was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, and he had grown up steeped in his uncle's ideas about the hidden desires that drive human behavior. Bernays believed something radical, that mass behavior could be engineered if you understood what people truly wanted beneath the surface. He didn't invent this system alone. A whole world of advertisers, retailers, and publicists was moving the same way. But he helped professionalize and popularize a craft he gave a clean name, public relations, and his campaigns didn't sell products, they sold meanings. He tied soap to the innocence of childhood. He tied bacon and eggs to the image of a proper American breakfast. He wasn't selling the thing, he was selling who you became when you bought it. Then came his most famous campaign. The American Tobacco Company had a problem. Women wouldn't smoke in public. Half the market was closed. The company's president told Bernays that if he could get women smoking outdoors, they'd nearly double their female market. So Bernays didn't run an ad about tobacco. He staged an event about freedom. On Easter Sunday, 1929, a group of young women he had recruited lit their cigarettes during New York's Easter parade on Fifth Avenue. They'd been coached on exactly what to tell reporters. These weren't cigarettes, they said. These were torches of freedom. Now, I'll be honest, because the truth matters. Bernays later exaggerated this. He claimed the press fell for it completely and that it sparked a national movement. The records show the event was carefully staged, but the idea that the media was fooled on a grand scale was largely a myth Bernays built around himself. Still, the technique was real and it was revolutionary. Because what was being sold was no longer a product. It was an identity. A need has a ceiling, but the desire to become someone does not. A system that had run out of needs to fill had discovered an endless supply of desires to manufacture. But even manufactured desire had a limit, so the system reached for another tool, the future itself. In the 1920s, installment credit exploded. Ordinary families began buying cars and appliances with money they didn't have yet, paying a little each month. Credit pulled tomorrow's purchases into today. It worked until it didn't. When the crash came in 1929 and incomes collapsed, that borrowed leverage turned into pain, debts that could no longer be paid. To be clear, credit didn't cause the Great Depression by itself. Bank panics, tight money, and falling output all played their part, but it showed how far the system would reach to keep demand alive. And then, in 1932, came one of the strangest ideas in economic history. A businessman named Bernard London proposed something radical to end the Depression. The government, he suggested, would assign every product an official lifespan: shoes, homes, machines. When that time expired, the product would be declared legally dead, handed to a government agency, and destroyed to force people to buy replacements and keep the factories running. London's plan was never adopted, and it wasn't yet the modern practice of secretly designing products to fail, though that already existed too. Just a few years earlier, in the mid-1920s, the world's largest light bulb makers had quietly agreed to limit how long their bulbs would last. But London's pamphlet named the fear out loud. What happens to production when customers simply keep what they already own? And remember the soap we started with? Walk into a store today and you're not buying soap, you're buying cleanliness, family, safety, belonging. The habit that was engineered a century ago is now simply the water we swim in. So here is the strange truth we're left with. Humanity spent thousands of years fighting scarcity, and the moment industry finally won, the moment there was more than enough, we discovered we couldn't stop. To keep the machines running, the economy had to manufacture something new, not just products, but the wanting itself. Abundance turned out to be a far more demanding master than scarcity ever was. So the next time you buy something you didn't know you wanted an hour ago, remember, a century ago, supply beat demand. And ever since, someone has had to fill that gap with desire. The question isn't whether you're being sold to, it's whether you know what you're actually buying. Now, if desire is the engine, then debt is the fuel line. And no one learned to control that fuel better than the banks. On the screen right now, I'm taking that machinery apart, piece by piece. I'll see you there.